Good afternoon. My name is John Hancock, and in the words of Henry VIII, as he spoke to each of his 6 wives, I won't keep you long. The fact is, when we study history and you hear my name, a common thing is that I could have vaporized out of history, walked over to a little place at Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia, sat down in a chair, and simply picked up a quill and signed my name on the Declaration of Independence. What would have happened? I could have disappeared for all that most people read about me in a history book. But I'm here to tell you more about that. You see, I started in Boston, Massachusetts. In fact, I was born in Braintree, a little town south of there. My father, his name was John Hancock, was the parson, the reverend of that little parish in Braintree. And actually, I had an interesting playmate. His name was John Adams. Perhaps you heard of him. I think he became the 2nd president of your United States, my United States. But back then, little John was a fat little kid. He became a fat big kid, actually. And we romped around and played in Braintree until something terrible happened. When I was 7 years old, as would happen to so many people because life expectancy was not that good, was that my father died. Well, so much for Christian charity. The town people got together and said, we need a new minister. And they, would you believe, threw my mother, my brother, and my sister out of the manse. We were thrown out of the parsonage. We had no place to go. So we ended up in a little place called Lexington. Perhaps you heard of that. Lexington was rather infamous to us because that's where my grandfather lived. His name was John, but he happened to be known as the Bishop of Lexington. He too was a minister. We migrated to Lexington and we lived with my grandfather and his wife and other children. That was going along okay, but it was very, very crowded. And my grandfather had something great planned for me. Since he was a minister, my father was a minister, he decided that guess what I would be? A minister. But thank God, I mean thank God, my Uncle Thomas and Aunt Lydia happened to be visiting from Boston, Massachusetts. And my Uncle Thomas was one of the wealthiest merchants in that town. And as God would give, they could not have children. And he decided he needed an heir, and it was a toss-up between myself and my brother Ebenezer. The interesting thing is, my Uncle Thomas liked the name John. So they took me back to Boston. I lived in a home on Beacon Hill, overlooking that metropolitan area of Boston and Boston Harbor, and had the opportunity to go to school. Went to Boston Latin School, one of the finest schools they had. Our school those days, for you young people in the audience, began at 7 o'clock in the morning. We always had some rum punch and maybe a biscuit for breakfast. By the way, we knew that you might say, goodness gracious, drinking alcohol? We knew that we could not drink water because it would make you sick. So we went on where school started at 7 in the morning. It ended at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. A long day. And then I had the privilege of being required to go to another school called scribing school, where we learned to write properly. As history would say, that's probably the only school I ever really attended, was writing school. Nonetheless, things went on well until at the age of 14, I happened to be lucky to go to Harvard College, where I went to school with some other people you may have heard of. One of them was Sam Adams. Another was a man named John Adams who followed us there, and so forth. Life was grand, and things were going along quite swimmingly for me. The reason I give you that preamble is because when we get to the study of American history, you may read about some famous people. You've heard of John Hancock, of course, that's me. But you've also heard of Sam Adams. You may have heard of a man named George Washington, Patrick Henry, or many other famous people, and Paul Revere. But of all of them, if I were to put my money on why we are sitting in a place called the United States of America, it's simply for one reason: Sam Adams. It wasn't for Sam being angry and ticked off at the world about everything that had to do with the British Empire, we would not be where we are.